Welcome back to our channel, Shattered Trust Stories, where we explore the untold stories of relationships, heartbreaks, and the unexpected twists of life. For over 20 years, I worked tirelessly. I built a real estate empire in New York City from the ground up, brick by brick, deal by deal. Every late night, every sacrifice, every ounce of my effort was for one reason: to build something that would secure my family's future. The city that never sleeps was where I made my name. But the most important part of my success wasn't the buildings or the wealth, it was my family. Or so I thought. On the day of my son's wedding, should have been the happiest man alive. A proud father, standing in front of all our family and friends, watching my son marry the love of his life. The day was meant to be a celebration of everything I had worked for, my legacy, my son's future, the culmination of everything I had built. But little did I know, that day would be the one that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The reception was lively, filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. But as I stood near the bar, a conversation I overheard sent a chill down my spine. It was an innocent enough comment at first. My wife, Lisa, was standing with some of her old friends. They were reminiscing about the good old days, chatting about my son's childhood, the time we spent as a family. But then, out of nowhere, one of her friends casually mentioned a name, someone I didn't recognize. It wasn't just the name. It was the way Lisa's face changed in an instant. A subtle shift, a flash of panic, that only someone who knew her well would notice. But I noticed. My heart sank, and everything around me seemed to slow down. I tried to shake it off, but the seed had been planted. Why had she reacted that way? Why was she so caught off guard by something so simple? I knew my wife. We had been together for over 25 years, and there was no one who knew her better than I did. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced as I replayed the conversation over and over again. Was I just being paranoid? Or was something more sinister at play? The next day, I decided to confront Lisa. I was done with the doubts, the confusion, the suspicion. I needed to know the truth. As we sat down in our living room, I could feel the tension in the air. The silence between us was deafening. I looked at her, and she looked back at me, her eyes betraying a mixture of guilt and fear. Lisa, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady but my heart pounding in my chest. She looked away, her fingers nervously twirling the edge of her dress. I had seen that nervous habit before, but it had never meant anything. Not until now. About what? She asked, her voice too calm, too controlled. About last night, I replied, my voice unwavering. You were talking to your friends, and you seemed off. There was a name mentioned, a name I didn't recognize. And the way you reacted. Lisa, I need to know what's going on. She froze. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, laugh it off, say I was imagining things. But instead, she simply stared at me. And for the first time in our marriage, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before: fear. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice shaky, but I wasn't buying it. Don't lie to me, Lisa, I said, my voice hardening. I know something's going on. You've been hiding something, haven't you? Something you've been keeping from me for years. Lisa's face paled. She stood up, as if to leave, but I reached out and grabbed her arm. Tell me the truth. I deserve to know. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. It was a long time ago, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. Before we got married, I had an affair. And the man, he's someone you know. My stomach dropped. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. Who? I demanded. Who is it? Lisa hesitated, then finally said, it was Greg. Your best friend. The one you've known since college. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My best friend. Greg. The man I had trusted with my life, the man I had spent decades building my empire with. The man I had called family. That I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me, betray everything we had built together, with someone I trusted so deeply? Why, was all I could manage to say. It was a mistake, Lisa said, her voice breaking. It was just one night. I was confused, and Greg, he was there for me. It didn't mean anything. But when I found out I was pregnant, I knew I had to keep it a secret. I knew I couldn't tell you the truth. I couldn't lose everything. The shock was overwhelming, but there was something else, too. A cold, hard realization. I couldn't trust her anymore. Not after everything. That I needed to know the full truth, so I demanded something I never thought I'd ask for. A DNA test. That it wasn't easy. Lisa fought me at first. She didn't want to do it. But I was relentless. I told her I had to know. I needed proof. And when the results came in, it was the final nail in the coffin. The child we had raised as our own for the last 20 years wasn't mine. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. My son, my flesh and blood, wasn't my son at all. The DNA test revealed that the father of the child was Greg. My best friend. The man who had been by my side through thick and thin. The man who had shared my triumphs and my failures. The man who had stolen from me in the worst possible way. But that wasn't the end of it. I had built my life around this family, around the idea of loyalty and trust. And now, everything I had worked for, my empire, my name, my legacy, felt like it was crumbling before my eyes. But if there was one thing I had learned in my years in real estate, it was that when everything is falling apart, you don't just sit back and watch. You take control. You rebuild. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to let Greg and Lisa get away with this. I wasn't going to let them destroy my family, my life, my legacy. I started my plan for revenge, methodically, carefully. I didn't make any rash moves. I knew that in this game, patience was key. But when the time came, when the trap was set, I made sure that Greg and Lisa felt the full weight of their betrayal. The days following the revelation were a blur. My mind raced with the implications of what had happened. I could still hear Lisa's voice, her weak attempts to justify her actions. The affair. The betrayal. And, most of all, the crushing realization that my son, the one I had raised as my own, loved as my own, was not my blood. The only thing that kept me grounded through the chaos was the burning need for revenge. I had been wronged on the deepest level imaginable, and I knew there was no turning back now. I couldn't let them, Greg, my supposed best friend, and Lisa, my wife, get away with it. The first thing I did was turn my focus to Greg. My mind kept going back to that moment when Lisa confessed. I thought about how Greg had been in my life for so long, how he had shared in my triumphs and failures. He had always been there, like a brother. And the thought that he had been sleeping with my wife, the woman I trusted more than anyone, ate away at me. This wasn't just about the affair, it was about trust. It was about the foundation of my life being completely shattered. I couldn't let him get away with it. I knew Greg's schedule inside and out. We had worked together for years in the real estate business. He was always involved in the planning, the meetings, the negotiations. We had shared everything, the highs and the lows. I knew how he operated, and I knew how to bring him down, but this was different. This wasn't some simple business transaction. This wasn't about taking him down in a corporate deal. This was personal. This was revenge. And I needed to play my cards carefully. I decided to meet Greg under the guise of business. He wouldn't suspect anything out of the ordinary. I arranged a meeting at one of the properties we had just closed on. A quiet, upscale location where we could talk in private without any prying eyes. When I arrived, Greg was already there, looking casual, his usual smug confidence on full display. He smiled when he saw me, like everything was normal. Like nothing had happened. "Hey, man. It's been a while. How's everything going?" he asked, walking over to shake my hand. He had no idea what was about to hit him. "Good. It's been a bit hectic," I said, maintaining a calm demeanor, my face a mask of controlled emotion. "Listen, I wanted to go over a few things about the property. I think we need to discuss the next steps, make sure we're on the same page." Greg nodded, clearly not suspecting anything was off. He had no idea how deeply his actions had cut me, how much his betrayal had affected my every thought. That we spent the next hour talking business, like we always had. But in the back of my mind, I was working on my plan. I was setting the stage. Greg had no idea that I already had everything I needed to tear his life apart. The first part of the plan was simple: gather information. I needed to know everything about Greg. His finances. His relationships. Any dirt I could dig up. And I knew exactly where to start. I had access to company accounts, personal files, and even private communications. It didn't take long to gather the necessary pieces. I found out that Greg had been living a double life, just like Lisa. He had a mistress, a younger woman he'd been seeing for years. A woman who didn't know about Lisa, of course. And I knew that this was where the leverage I needed lay. That I wasn't just going to ruin his reputation. I was going to destroy the life he had carefully built, but I wasn't ready to make my move just yet. I needed to hit him where it would hurt the most. Greg had always been a man of pride. He valued his status, his image in the community, and especially his business dealings. And I knew that if I exposed his affair with Lisa, if I revealed everything about the double life he'd been leading, it would destroy him in ways he could never recover from. But that was only part of the equation. That I had to deal with Lisa too. Her betrayal cut deeper than anything Greg could have done. She was my wife. The woman I had shared my life with for decades. The woman who had been the mother of my children. How could she do this? How could she betray me in such a cruel, calculated way? Lisa's guilt was evident in the days following our confrontation. She tried, over and over again, to apologize. She begged for forgiveness, for a second chance. She told me she was sorry. But I could see through it. It wasn't genuine. She was trying to salvage what she could, trying to get back to the life she had before the truth came out, but there was no going back. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to play the fool anymore. I took action quickly. The first step was to confront Lisa again. I needed her to understand that I wasn't just some man she could walk all over. I wasn't going to just forgive her and move on. I needed to make her feel the weight of her actions. She came to me one evening, her eyes red from crying. "John," she whispered, her voice broken. "I know what I did was wrong. I was weak. But please, don't throw away everything we've built. Please, we can fix this." I looked at her for a long moment, letting the silence hang in the air. My heart wasn't in this conversation anymore. My heart had already been shattered, and now it was time to take back control. "You're right," I said slowly. "We can't fix this. Not anymore. You've broken something that can't be repaired." Lisa's eyes widened with shock. What do you mean?" she stammered, her voice shaky. "I mean that I'm done," I said, my tone cold. "I'm done with you. And I'm done with Greg. You both ruined everything." Lisa's face fell. She had no idea what was coming next, but I wasn't finished. I needed to hit her where it hurt the most. So I made sure she knew that her betrayal wouldn't go unpunished. "Here's the thing, Lisa," I said. "I've already taken care of Greg. And I'm about to take care of you." Her eyes widened with fear as she realized what I meant. The next few days were filled with chaos. I didn't give her a chance to explain or apologize. I had already made my decisions, and nothing was going to change my mind. I had already begun working with my legal team to ensure she would have no claim to the real estate empire I had built. I wasn't going to let her take even a single cent from me and Greg. His downfall was just beginning. I set everything in motion. First, I sent the anonymous letters to his mistress, detailing everything I knew about their affair. I knew she would be devastated, but I didn't care. I had been devastated first. Then, I began leaking the information about his business dealings to the press. It didn't take long before the media picked up the story, and soon everyone knew about Greg's affair, his lies, and his double life. The fallout was immediate. Greg's reputation was in ruins. His business deals collapsed one after another. He lost everything. His mistress left him. And his so-called friends turned their backs on him. He had nowhere to hide. He had nowhere to run. The aftermath of Greg's fall from grace was swift, as if the universe itself had decided to make him pay for his betrayal. The media reports hit him like a tsunami, each article, each post, each interview painting him as a man without honor. His affair with Lisa was splashed across every headline, and the whispers of corruption in his business dealings spread like wildfire. What was once a respected businessman, a man everyone trusted, was now a pariah. He had become a cautionary tale, a story of greed, deceit, and unfaithfulness that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But that wasn't enough for me. No, my revenge wasn't just about public humiliation, it was about taking everything from him. And the thing Greg held most dear, the thing that had always been his prized possession, was his business. The empire he had built alongside me, the company that had once stood as a symbol of our joint success, was now on the brink of collapse. I took the next step with cold precision. I had already known about the shady dealings Greg had been involved in over the years: bribery, fraudulent investments, backroom deals. He had been using his position for personal gain, lining his pockets with the wealth that should have been ours. As soon as the information became public, I started making calls. I had the leverage, and I knew exactly how to use it. Greg had no idea that I had been quietly gathering evidence, preparing for this moment. I leaked everything, every illegal transaction, every shady deal, every lie, directly to the authorities. It didn't take long for the FBI to get involved, and soon, Greg's financial empire began to unravel. Accounts were frozen, assets seized, and his business associates distanced themselves from him like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Greg was no longer a successful businessman, he was a criminal. A fraud. And the law was closing in fast. But still, that wasn't enough. Greg wasn't just a business partner, he had been my friend. Or so I thought. And the hurt, the betrayal I felt, had to be dealt with in a way that would make sure he understood just how deep his lies had cut. I needed him to know that he would never recover from this. I arranged a meeting, a final confrontation. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to get out of it. Maybe some small part of me still wanted an apology. Some shred of remorse. But I knew deep down that Greg was incapable of feeling that kind of guilt. He was too proud, too arrogant, to acknowledge what he had done to me. The meeting took place at one of the properties I had once shared with him, a sleek glass building overlooking the city. It was symbolic, the place where we had once built everything together, now the place where everything was about to come crashing down. When Greg walked in, he was a shell of the man I had once known. He was gaunt, his face pale, his confidence shattered. He had lost everything, the life he had built, the money, the status. It was all gone, John, he said, his voice weak, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and anger. I know what you're doing. You've destroyed me. You've taken everything from me. I didn't speak at first. I simply stood there, watching him. The man who had once been my closest ally was now broken, a shadow of his former self. You did this to yourself, I finally said, my voice low but steady. You betrayed me. You destroyed everything we had built together. And now you're paying the price. Greg looked at me, his hands shaking slightly. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't want any of this to happen. It was just supposed to be one thing. One mistake. But it turned into something bigger. You're right, I replied coldly. It wasn't just one mistake. It was years of lying, of using me, of manipulating me into thinking you were my friend. You had no problem destroying me to get ahead, Greg. But I'm not the one who's destroyed now. Greg tried to stand tall, his pride flaring up. You think you've won, don't you? He spat. You think you've taken everything from me. But you haven't. I'll rebuild. I'll come back stronger than ever. You'll see. I stepped closer, my eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made him flinch. You'll never rebuild, Greg. You'll never come back from this. Not after what you've done. His expression shifted, a flicker of realization flashing in his eyes. He knew I wasn't just talking about business. I was talking about something deeper. I was talking about trust. About the fact that I would never forgive him for what he had done to my family. For what he had done to me. I turned away from him and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. It's over, Greg, I said, my voice softer now, but still cold. You lost. And you lost everything. I didn't look back as I left the room. The weight of the years we had spent together, the years of shared work, shared life, all of it felt so distant now. The man I had once trusted was gone. And with him, the last semblance of the life I had once thought I knew. While Greg was crumbling, Lisa was no better off. She had been trying desperately to regain my favor, but I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to forgive her. I wasn't going to pretend that everything was okay. The hurt she had caused was too deep, too raw. But she wasn't going to just walk away unscathed. I arranged a meeting with her, the final confrontation. I needed her to see the consequences of her actions. She had stolen my trust, my love, and she had betrayed me with the one man I had called a friend. Lisa arrived at the meeting, her face pale and full of anxiety. She was trembling. She knew what was coming. She sat down across from me, wringing her hands nervously. John, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was weak. It was a mistake. I love you. Please, we can fix this. We can go back to the way things were. I looked at her, my gaze hard and unyielding. No, Lisa. You can't take back what you did. You can't fix this. You betrayed me in the worst way possible. And now you have to live with the consequences. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, her hands trembling. Please, John. I never meant to hurt you. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Don't even try to justify it, I snapped. It doesn't matter. You made your choice. You destroyed everything. And now you'll have to live with it. For a moment, there was silence between us. The years of marriage, the years of love and trust, felt like they had been completely erased in an instant. You've lost me, Lisa, I said, my voice firm. And you've lost everything. And with that, I walked out, leaving her sitting there in the silence, her tears the only sound in the room. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Greg's business continued to collapse, and Lisa's attempts at salvaging anything from our marriage were fruitless. My life, the one I had spent years building, had been shattered by betrayal, but now, as I watched everything fall into place, I realized something important. Revenge had given me the power to rebuild. That I had lost everything. But in the end, I would emerge stronger. More determined. I would take back control of my life. I would build a new legacy, one that was built on my own terms. And as for Greg and Lisa, they would never be the same. The damage they had done to my life had been irreparable. They had played their cards, and now they were left with nothing.